So yeah, good afternoon or morning or evening, everyone, and depending on where we are. Thank you for joining the online seminar organized by the Department of English and Communication, Hong Kong Poly U. And today we're really happy to have our guest speaker, Adrian Leemann. So Adrian Leemann is a professor of German sociolinguistics at the University of Bern, and he studied the linguistics in Bern, then moved to New York, Winnipeg, and did his PhD study in 2009 on Swiss German intonation. So his research focused on dialect variation, language change, and forensic phonetics, and phonetics as well, with the project often combining traditional methods and digital tools such as smartphone apps for large-scale data collection. So his recent work includes some Swiss German dialects, which will document regional and generational patterns of variation from the 1950s to the present. And just recently, he got a big grant working on the English dialect documentation, and he will talk about this probably in his talk. So without further ado, I'll pass the mic to Adrian for the talk Mapping Swiss German, Creating a Dialect Atlas in the Digital Age. Thank you, Leemann.
Thanks so much, Bruce. Thanks so much for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here with you online. Right, so we'll jump right in. What I have planned for the next 45 minutes. I want to introduce the Dialect Atlas, which is the atlas that we made for Swiss German, which is this book here that came out in print a year ago. I want to talk especially about the methods, how we actually got to doing this. And then show you some first results other than the atlas, where we look at specific variables, linguistic variables. And then I want to move over to the new atlas that Bruce already mentioned that we have planned for England and Wales, which starts in the fall of next year. Right, the atlas. It's this book that I just showed to you. I'll give you some context. So Switzerland is in the heart of Western Europe. And we have 4 official languages. We have German, which is spoken in the Midlands mostly here, and in the Southwest, but also in the Southeast. Here's Italian spoken in the Ticino. We have Romansh speakers here, a couple of thousand speakers of a minority language, and you have French speaking areas in the west of the country. So it's 4 official languages. And this atlas and this study is about the Swiss German dialects, which are spoken by about 60% of the population. Right, quick intro about the book. How is it structured? It's 160 linguistic phenomena split up into lexis, so we call it Wortschatz, lexis, phonetics, phonology, grammar. Can you see my cursor? Sorry, I'm moving around on the screen.
Yeah, I can see it.
You can see it, perfect. Yeah. So on grammar and about pragmatics, which we call language in everyday context, so Sprache im Alltag. So these are the main chapters that we have, and then each of these main sections has another subsection that says frequent words, and then you have a list of phenomena like this would be nothing, nichts, jemand is somebody, prepositions, so like these frequent words that often come up in conversations. That's this section on this. Here it's about animals, here it's about house and garden, here's about food and drinks, etc. These are the vowels, consonants, prosody. This is about verbs, nouns, adjectives, pronouns, and gender. And this is about syntax over here. And here you have greeting formula in the pragmatic section and politeness formula in this section as well. Just to give you a brief overview, and that took us 5 years to actually get to this result. The book is always structured like this, so I can show it to you here, so it's always 2-sided, so you always have 3 maps in the book. On the top left, you have the historical data, which we didn't collect ourselves. This is where people, dialectologists ask them, how do you greet someone in the morning whom you don't know? Would you say grüezi? Would you say grüß euch? Guten Tag, so good day. This is the generation of like the boomer generation that we collected ourselves, and the millennial generation we also collected ourselves. And what you always get is 3 data points. So you get the historical data on the top left that we just digitized from previous data from 100 years ago. This is data we collected ourselves, these 2 maps. And then you basically get 3 time points, and that's lovely because you can cross compare, between the time points, and you get a feel for how language evolves over time, over about 100 years. From the generation born between 1870 and 1900 to the boomer generation and to the millennial generation. You get a parent time change, but also real time change comparing it to historic data. Yeah. And what you see here, for example, is how the Zurich variant Grüezi is now diffusing towards the west, right? So we often get that phenomenon that you get the Zurich, which is the most populous city, which is here by the lake. That feature starts diffusing. That happens quite frequently. You also get the phenomenon here is where we ask, for the word puddle. So here the question was, please complement the phrase. The child is jumping into a, and they had to say puddle. I would say, I'm from here. I would say klunke here. In Zurich, they used to say, what's the green one? Kumpe. That's an odd way of labeling we did here. So they would say kumpe, you have Gilla in the southwest, but in the Alps here, etc. And what you see now in this map, for example, is how the Pfütze variant, the orange one, is now kind of creeping in from the northern boundary to Germany. So you have Germany in the north here, and that's something we also get quite frequently in Lexis, that the standard German form that you see here was already here 100 years ago, especially in the cities, like Zurich, for example. And now it's diffusing, coming across the border along this, usually from the northeast corridor, it's coming into the country. So people tend to say more and more Pfütze. So my son, who's 6, already says Pfütze, right? I would still say Glunke. So you get that kind of convergence towards the standard. And we can look at these changes across 160 phenomena. You always, it's interesting because you always see somewhat different patterns per phenomenon. Okay, now how do we actually get here? So the idea was I came up with the idea about 10 years ago. I wanted to replicate the historic atlas, the linguistic atlas of Swiss German, which is an 8-volume, massive publication. They published about 2,500 maps based on 600 data points. So they collected data from 600 localities across the German-speaking part that you see here. And they mostly collected data from norms, so non-mobile older rural males. Here's the dialectologist, that's Rudolf Hotzenköcherle, interviewing an old farmer, right? And they usually stayed with him for a couple of days and walked through the farmlands and, asked, what's your word for this device? What do you call that type of animal, etc. And then they made these beautiful maps, such as this one. So this is again for the puddle, die Pfütze. So I'm from here, 47, it says here. It's Aargau 47. Back in the day, I had these 2 lines. So these symbol maps, the 2 lines, when you look here, indicate Glunke. So each symbol represents a different variant. Yeah, that's like traditional classic dialectology. And then we basically digitize these maps to get them in the same aesthetic that we use for our maps. There was a study that came up about 15 years ago that digitized the original historic data like this one, and they made a popular science book that was sold really well, showing the historical distribution, but in a new way, with very colorful and lovely maps. So I applied for the grants to basically, we knew that dialects have changed dramatically over the past 100 years, but there's been no major study that looked at an area covering large-scale survey. What does it look like today? And what happens when you compare that to historic data, which are the social drivers of change? And that was the motivation for the project. I attempted it 3 times at the Swiss National Science Foundation, was rejected twice. That happens. And I got funded the 3rd time around. This was the original project group with Jan Mesterli, Petri Jasenski, Melanie Studerus, and Karina Steiner, and our dog Nemo. Not our dog, but my dog, our family dog Nemo. And we started the project 6 years ago, so in September of 2019. Let me briefly walk you through how do we collect the survey sites. So we knew we had 5 years, so we couldn't collect, data from 600 points. We had to reduce the survey sites. And to do that, we basically used dialectometry, where we ran models that showed us, well, you look at, say, 600 phenomena, from grammar, from phonetics, from lexis, which localities cluster together. And we knew we had capacity and resources to collect data from 125 localities. So we ran an algorithm that showed us, so these yellow points here, for example, they all behave very similarly in these 600 linguistic variables. In this valley here, you get these light green dots. They also behave very similarly. Look, if you look at 600 phenomena in Swiss German, so that basically allowed us to then pick out from these 6-7 data points just one or two as a representative for that larger region. I hope that makes sense. So it was like a geospatial clustering that we did to kind of reduce the survey sites that we can actually look at. If you have questions, please feel free to always raise the hand and ask while I'm talking. Okay, I hope that's clear so far. These are the final survey sites that we selected. It's 127 survey sites. So it's like a reduced net of localities compared to the historic data. We sampled 1,000 speakers from 2 age groups. So we had, this is the frequency, the counts, and this is age here. So we had the boomer generation, which you see here, so age between 60 and about 80. We left out the generation X, and then we collected data from the millennial generation. And we wanted to like leave out one generation so we can kind of get a better feel for what's happening in terms of larger time spans when we didn't have the resources to collect data from 3 generations. So we have the boomer generation, millennials, and we can then compare that to historic data from the historic atlas that I just showed to you. I hope that's clear so far. We always sampled 8 speakers per locality. So for example, here in Plaufeyen, we collected data from 8 speakers. 4 of them were from the older cohort, 4 from the younger cohort, and it's always balanced for age. So for gender, so 2 females, 2 males per age cohort, So it's a fully symmetrical design. So for each locality, we have 8 speakers, 4 older, 4 younger. We collected data we recruited people through like municipalities. I mean, we wanted to find people who speak like the local dialect, right? Who are not too mobile, who still say they speak the local dialect. And you find these people like in different clubs. So like the chess club or the yodel club of some remote locality. So like all these remote localities here in the mountains, so Frutiger, Adelboden, Blatten, they tend to have these like clubs. Like I said, the Yodel Club, the German Shepherd Dog Club or whatever, and they attract people from the region. So we contacted people through these clubs. We went to the original place where the original linguistic atlas data is stored. So all of the books you see over here, these are original leaflets that dialectologists wrote their notes on. We wanted to make sure that we can pick the same kind of prompts to collect the data, again, to like maximize cross comparison between our study and the historical atlas that I mentioned earlier. So we looked at how do they phrase the questions, like when you want to ask for a puddle, like which image did they use, or like which phrasing did they use. We wanted to make sure that it's identical, so we don't get like artifacts methodologically. So we ended up with a catalog of about 350, I think, items that you see here. So this is all lexis, here's some morphology here. And this is how we collected data with these prompts. So here it was about the bee, for example. So the question was, what do you call this insect? And which is an image of a bee, and we wanted to trigger them to say bienli, bieni, imbi, whatever they use in their dialect. Overall, for the atlas, we have about a third is lexis, a third is phonetics phonology, a quarter is grammar, so morphology and syntax, and about 7% is items on pragmatics. Originally, we collected data, in the field. We wanted to go to people's homes, with really good recording equipment. We had speech recorder on. It's a tool from Munich where you can put it on a laptop, and you can kind of control the tool through mouse clicking. So here they see the image. You can hit record, play it, and then go to the next prompt. You can do that with different prompts. Here's where we tested the interface.
Was hast du gesehen?
Was the sound okay?
Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So basically, she didn't know the name for this animal. To be frank, I don't think I would know. Is it yeah, I'd have to think about it. So we tested different prompts. We did lots of testing to see if people actually get what we want. And you also have to do this in different dialects. So you make sure that the prompts are understood in different regions and different age cohorts. This was our first participant of 1,000 here. This is the 2 researchers on the project. And we also had them fill out like an extensive metadata questionnaire after the recording session that lasted about 2 hours per person, where we asked them about their social networks, who are their best friends, what dialect do they speak. We asked them about their personality traits, like the big 5 personality traits, their mobility behavior, like a full range of metadata that helps us now to kind of explain the patterns that I just showed earlier. Like, how do we explain that Pfütze is now moving in, for the puddle from Germany to Switzerland? And we want to figure out which social factors drive that change. Then there was the lockdown in March of 2020. So this is where the Swiss Federal Council announced the lockdown, and we had to change to like remote data collection, which meant lots of trying out different ways of app designs to figure out how we can collect data. Here we tested the app, for example. Pinguin. Tomate. And you see the problem, it crashed on the left-hand side, even though I think it was it the same? I think it was even the same model iPhone. So it basically meant you have to do lots of testing on different devices and different operating systems. Because if you collect data from 1,000 people and they all have different specs on their phones, you have to make sure that the app runs smoothly and that the recordings are good. Because you can't really fix their technical issues, remotely. So we ended up with an app that had almost 370 prompts in it. Here we asked them to say, for example, what do you call this animal? I would say Hund. Where I'm in Bern, they would say Hung. So it's about anti-vilirization. This is about the puddle. Here we asked them to translate the sentence, Kat is wild, so the cat is wild. Where I would say Kat is wild, in some mountain regions they would say Kat is wildi. So they inflect the adjective in that position, wild, wildi. And here we asked them to translate the sentence and to complement the sentence, I see the, I would say I see the plate. In German, I would say ich sehe den Teller. So for me, it's the gender is masculine, and I would say Teller for plate, and I wouldn't say Dauer. So we also collect data on L vocalization. So we have basically 2 phenomena in this prompt. So you have the gender for the plate, which can be der Teller or das Teller, der oder das, and you also get L vocalization in this bit here. This is how it worked. So this was one of the researchers on the project who was now interviewing one of the participants. We always supervised them on Zoom. So they spoke into the app, and Melanie had headphones in, and she could basically listen to the actual prompts being uploaded in real time, so we can check the quality of the recording. But you always supervise them on Zoom, so we can instruct them, we can give feedback if they have questions. This is basically what it looked like for almost 2 hours per person.
Eidechse. Christeli. Nüt.
I can skip the rest. It was actually quite dull sometimes, unfortunately. And keep in mind, this happened like 1,000 times 2 hours. So it's a lot of work, and I thank God I had a big team who did a fantastic job of collecting that data. When the kind of restrictions loosened up a bit, we were able to go into the field again. So here we went to the Ticino, the Italian-speaking part. There is one enclave there that still speaks a form of Swiss German. And we went there that has like 20 or 30 speakers left who still speak that dialect. So we collected, data from 8 speakers from that region. And we went there also because, we just wanted to go there because it's so beautiful and so lovely and really, really kind people. And this is where it was in Bosco Gurin, it's called, in the Italian-speaking part. Here, Peter, I think, is trying out the iPad that showed some error message. He's like shit, it's frozen, what do I do? And you're basically there in the field. What do you do, right? You have to, act on the spot and then maybe take out the laptop and record the person on the laptop. So this is what we end up with. It's basically sound files, which we at this stage just coded auditorily. So we basically listen to the files and then we code what we hear.
Klumpen.
Lachen.
Glute.
Gumpa.
Glunken. Pedere.
Gutler.
So these are some of the words for puddle, for example. And we basically had this, it's very amateur style. We basically had a spreadsheet per variable. This is the spreadsheet for puddle. You have the UID, so 1,000 unique identifiers per person, so it's anonymous. You have what they say in Swiss German, use kind of an orthographic transcription, not IPA. And this is where we code the data, just auditorily at this stage. And then you have to figure out, like, how do you start kind of grouping the variables, or the variants in a way that makes sense? Because on a map, let me show you, like on a map, like here, what's a good one? Yeah. So with the leftover of an apple, when you eat an apple, what do you call this bit? There's lots of like 40 variants, or it used to be like 40 variants in Swiss German. And the problem is with maps, you only can illustrate about 12 to 15 different variants because you're restricted by the color, and otherwise it gets too busy and not intelligible anymore. So you have to start like grouping the variants in a way that's sensible and also like semantically and lexically plausible. So when somebody would say Pflitze, Pfütze, or Pützi, we would categorize that as Pütze plus minus. If somebody would say Butz or Butzle or Bütze or Bitze, we categorize that as Butz, right? So you have to kind of start grouping and then also assign colors depending how you feel, which variants are connected, right? So for example, Gumpe, Glumpe, Glute are probably all have like a similar word stem etymologically. So you group them, for example, all in greenish colors, like dark green, lighter green, and even lighter green, to illustrate like word relationships, word relations. Just methodologically, we used Trello, the project management tool, because there were about 15, 20 people working on the project at the same time. That allowed us to kind of, do that efficiently. So yeah, like one column for coding check, one column for, creating maps, etc. And each card that you see here is, for example, this would be the card for L vocalization in the word Himmel, so sky. People can say Himmel, people can say Himmel. And then once you have, you check the code and you move that card over to the next column or swim lane, what it's called, so you know the next person can take on the next task with that variable. Right, so ultimately we had to select colors, and thank God we had somebody from like a designer with us, a graphics designer, who helped us with the color palette, because we're not from that area. We don't have that kind of expertise. And then we also had Fabian Tomaszek on board, who was able to there were about 500 maps in the book. So you can really scale the maps that have to be made with R scripts and with QGIS. You wouldn't be able to do that by hand within the time frame that we had. Like I said, we used a form of phonetic script that's still writable, with graphemically. It's kind of a mix between kind of IPA-like, but also the way that we write in Swiss German. So, for example, you can still get, I would say for the words, this is for Middle High German, a, as in the word Käse, so cheese, I would say Käse. You get Käse, which is slightly higher. You get Käse, so diphthongized variants. Käse, which is even higher than Käse over here. So you can kind of, with these accents, you can illustrate kind of vowel height, for example. Right. We wrote the texts kind of last minute. It wasn't planned so well on my part. And the texts are meant to be standalone. So you can basically open up a page in the Atlas and you still understand fully what we say in that text without having looked at the previous maps and other maps in the book. So they're like standalone texts. And they're written in such a way that like an educated layperson can understand them. It's not meant as a scientific publication per se. We did this collaboratively, which wasn't always the easiest, but I think that's, what that's like if you write in big groups. In the end, we also wanted to make sure that we can accompany everything with audio. I think that's really important that you, especially for like phonetic variables, whether you say gas, gees, or gees for the vowel in cheese, gas, I think it helps for the lay people to get a good, feel for that if they can listen to audio. So we picked out like sample audio from different regions so they can listen to that. For example, here it's again for the word puddle. You can listen to that on an app.
Bedera.
Wasserputz.
Putz.
Pütze.
Gille.
Etc. So basically you can scan the QR code down here, and then you can listen to the different regions, what they sound like. And we also do that for like grammatical phenomena. So what you see here is first, second, and third person plural of the verb to be. So I would say, I'm from here, I would say wir sind, ihr sind, sie sind. So we are, they are, we are, they are, we are, you are, they are, sorry. If you're in Bern, like I am now, people would say wir sie, ihr seid, sie sind. So like a two-form system. If you go further south, you get a three-form system where people would say wir sie, ihr seid, sie sind. So we get sie, sid, sind. Whereas I would just say sind for first, second, and third person plural. And it's also nice, you can also listen to that. So you get these variants, like I would say it, like this.
Wir sind, ihr sind, sie sind.
So we are, you are, they are. And if you go to the southwest, you get this.
Wir sie, ihr seid, sie sind.
I think that also helps for people to understand that we also, like in terms of morphology and syntax, where people, differ a lot in regionally. And often what people think is that they think, oh yeah, there's so much variation in lexis, maybe in phonetics, like here, in the vowel for gas, but they're not often aware that there's also so much variation in syntax and morphology. So here's for Middle High German a, for cheese, gas.
Gas.
Gees.
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 Gies.
Right. I hope that made sense. We did like final proofing at the end, and we uploaded all the maps, open access. You can download all the maps and the whole atlas for free as a PDF. And so this is basically the story of how this book how this book came about. And what we're doing now is we're actually writing, proper. We did a couple of scientific papers previously, but now we have the time to actually really look at the data and look at actually what's happening for each phenomenon for scientific publications. So for example, here, this is a map that looks at convergence towards German, for example, in voice onset time. So here we only have two maps. This is the generation boomer that we collected. This, God. And this is basically, what was I going to say? This is basically an average of 5 or 6 tokens where you have a plosive word initially. And you can vary that. You can say Patrick, so with a very low VOT, or you can say Patrick with very much high VOT, like aspirated. So Patrick versus Patrick. You get the same in tomate, so tomato, tomate versus tomate, for example, right? And what you see here is that in the south, you tend to have very, short VOTs. The further north you go, the more closer you come to the German border, the more you get aspirated articulations in these words. And what's cool now is when you compare it to the younger generation, you see that overall there's a steep increase in VOT. So people tend to say a lot more Patrick, Tomate, Parliament, as opposed to Parliament for Parliament. And we think there's like a convergence happening towards Standard German, because in Swiss German, you typically don't have aspiration in that position. In Standard German, you do. So you get like very fine, in very fine phonetic detail, you see how we're converging towards Standard German in the north. Let me skip the next one. Let me talk to you about this, which I find quite intriguing. So when I speak German, my R quality is alveolar. So I would say Rande for beetroot. I would say Rad for wheel. There are some people that, back in the day, this is the historic map, people in Zurich might have said Rad as opposed to Rad, so for wheel, so uvular R. The same in Bern, same in the southwest, and here in Basel as well. So this is backed R, this is forward R, so the alveolar R, uvular R. And what's interesting is when you compare that to the older generation today, you see a diffusion of the uvular R in the northeast, which the younger cohort does even more. And that's interesting and intriguing to me because we did studies that showed the uvular R's are really kind of frowned upon and not judged as aesthetically sounding, pleasant. But still it's diffusing, which is kind of a puzzle to us. Maybe you have some good insights for us in the Q&A. So here's what we find. So the uvular R, we're a country of basically alveolar R's in the German-speaking part. And that's currently changing, which through like a corridor from the northeast, coming in from Germany again, where the uvular R in this region is also common. And you see how it's diffusing, especially in the younger generation, in this corridor towards the southeast. So we don't really know what's happening here. And one of my PhDs is now writing a paper on this. Right, we're also doing a current study, and then I move over to the English project on vocal profile analysis for Swiss German. What's a vocal profile? Basically, we use a simplified vocal analysis protocol from San Segundo, where we want to look at, is there like regional variation in terms of how people have vocal tract settings? Is it possible that you might get regions that have more like labial articulations with more like lip rounding, with more nasal voice quality, nasal voice types, with more creaky or whispery voice? So we're looking at that now with in a study. You might know some of these studies. So for example, for Glasgow, Stuart Smith found that, working class speakers tend to have open jaw, harsh voice, middle class speakers more like neutral, less tense articulation. For Scottish English, Beck and Schaeffler found that urban Glasgow teens have more like constricted voices. Rural speakers have more laxer, open voices. Peters for Germany found, southern speakers are more breathy, softer. Northern speakers are more tense, less breathy. And most recently, for Australian English, White, Penny, and Cox found there's a sharp rise in creaky voice among young women. I'm kind of inspired by these studies. We wanted to kind of test that for the Swiss German context, looking at spontaneous speech data from our corpus. So we also asked these thousand people not only to work on prompts with us, but also talk to us for like 10, 15 minutes spontaneously, so we get spontaneous speech data from them. We thought, but we might expect that you get more like nasal qualities in the northeast. That's kind of anecdotal evidence. You get more like pharyngeal expansion, more like hyperarticulation in the central Switzerland. And younger men tend to have more lax vocal tracts in the sense that they are a bit more slurry, don't articulate so precisely. And the younger women have perhaps more like neutral vocal tracts. And for this, we just code one voice per locality at this stage, a younger person. It's a smaller sample in a sense because it takes so long to code the data. And we do that, the four of us, so it's 4 people coding all the voices. And then we try to, figure out what's the interlabel agreement. We calculate that with Fleiss Kappa, and it turns out, well, it's not a surprise that the agreement is really, really bad. Previous studies have showed that, also from York, from the group around Paul Fawkes, that vocal profile analysis is notoriously difficult to find like a common denominator among many coders. So just keep that in mind when I show the results. This is what we currently find. We do, having coded these 127 speakers, we find that you do get more like nasally quality in the northeast. That's called velopharyngeal, so like more nasal quality perceptually. This is based on perceptual coding. You get more like pharyngeal expansion in central Switzerland, meaning that they like hyper-articulate, they talk very carefully, kind of loudly, as if they were projecting to an audience. And you do get more lax vocal tracts in younger male speakers. Now, why is that the case? Basically, they like reflect community norms. And the nasal voices in the east and laxness in younger males index like regional or generational affiliation. So it's kind of indexing that you're from a region or from a generation. And this type of pharyngeal expansion, I think, could be explained by, it's like a local ideal of a kind of clarity and expressiveness. But that's very preliminary, but we're kind of digging into that now at the moment. Right, now for the final 10 minutes, I want to look at the new atlas that we have planned for the England and Wales. So you probably know the Survey of English Dialects. We basically want to do like current version of variation in England and Wales that we can then compare to the Survey of English Dialects. And there's a project that's done in collaboration with Dave Britton, Paul Fawkes, and David Willis at Oxford. It's called CURLEW, Census of Urban and Regional Language in England and Wales. It's funded by the SNFF and by UKRI. This was in January of this year, where we basically drafted the grant proposal over a couple of intense days in Bern. And it's always a lottery, you never know with these grants, but we were really thankful and happy that we actually got the grant in the end. What do we plan to do in this project? So basically, we think it will be like the first large-scale systematic supervised sociolinguistic survey of spoken English in England and Wales since the 50s and 60s. There have been lots of crowdsourcing studies and other larger scale studies, but they're often not supervised. So basically, anybody can participate in many of these studies. So we want to pick very carefully pick selected speakers from different localities and different cohorts. So that's why it's a supervised sociolinguistic survey, and it'll be large scale, running over 5 years. It covers urban and rural areas, 2 age groups, genders, ethnicities, and social strata. And it's basically meant to complement the SCD, updated in methodology, that we can cross-compare that to the historic data. Now for the survey sites, the SCD I think had around 313 survey sites. We want to pick 125 in England and 16 in Wales and plus Isle of Man. They're chosen based on dialect diversity, again through cluster analysis. So if you look on dialectcarton.ch, you can cluster using I think about 300 SCD phenomena, and then you want to see which dialects cluster based on these 300 phenomena, and you see that these 20 clusters, and you could basically do that for, let's say you want to pick 141 sites. You basically put the algorithm in such a way that it spits out 141 clusters based on dialectometrical analysis. And we also look at population spread, because the SCD, as with the Swiss Atlas, they really did heavy sampling in rural communities. We also want to make sure that we get data from the urban population. We do exclude Scotland and Ireland for comparability with the SCD. And we think together these sites give a comprehensive regional coverage. So urban, rural, north, south, and east, west. Now, who do we pick as speakers? For the main project, we have 1,100 speakers, 8 speakers per locality, same with the Swiss Atlas. It's heavily based on, in terms of methodology, on the Swiss Atlas that I just presented. So out of these 8 speakers, again, 4 younger and 4 older. And we do focus overall on lower education speakers, as they're mostly the dialect speakers, meaning below level 4, so pre-university degree. We will have an ethnic sub-project where one of the PhDs will look at 8 additional young speakers from minority groups in 20 sites. So 160 additional speakers. So for example, the Pakistani community in Birmingham, to get a feel for, what's the role of ethnicity in language variation and change in the context of this large project. We'll have an education sub-project with 8 additional highly educated speakers in 20 sites. So, for example, we look at the lower education speakers in Cambridge on the one hand in the main project, and in the side project and sub-project, we look at highly educated speakers in Cambridge to get, again, a feel for what's the role of education in terms of, how you speak and how that affects whether, how you have changed compared to the SCD. So that adds up to about 1,500 speakers in total. Participants are recruited locally, press, radio, social media. And we do the field work in the same way that we did it with the Swiss project. It's done by 2 postdocs, 5 PhDs, and student assistants. We'll have a 3-part material section. On the one hand, target variables, so about 300 features, again, similar to the Swiss Atlas, covering lexis, phonetics, phonology, all of the linguistic levels. We also collect red speech, which we also did for the Swiss Atlas, for a controlled phonetic study, and spontaneous speech, a 10-minute conversation to capture natural variation. So that adds up about 150 phonetic, 50 lexical, 90 grammatical, and 10 course variables, along with these phenomena here. And about 120 of these key variables will feature in the final atlas, which will be similar like this, but for England and Wales. And the other variables will be analyzed in later studies. Like I said earlier, data will be collected through a smartphone app. For example, here are some sample prompts from the proposal, like what do you call this small piece of bread? Here it's about dative alternation. Would you say, give it to me, give me it, give it me? You know, in terms of which sounds most natural to you. Complete the sentence completion tasks, etc. All the recordings are standardized, lossless WAV format. And again, we get lots of metadata from the participants, probably analogous to what we did for the Swiss context. We will use like automatic transcription tools like Whisper AI that's then checked by hand. And the plan is, of course, to make everything open access for future studies and research on this topic. In terms of personnel, who is involved, so we have 2 postdocs, full-time, one in Bern, one in Oxford. The Bern postdocs, the jobs will be advertised in January if anybody's interested. The Bern postdoc will have like the tech lead, logistics, daily operations. The Oxford postdoc is more like a data scientist, statistics, GIS mapping person. We have 5 PhD students, 3 in Bern, 1 Oxford, and 1 in York. They work on different types of topics that you can see here, which I mentioned earlier. There's also 1 PhD works on forensic applications with Paul Fawkes in York. There are 4 student assistants, 2 in Bern, 1 Oxford, 1 York, who do like data processing. And we will also have a media recruitment manager placed in York to kind of, you know, we assume there will be like a very media heavy project, lots of science communication happening, because people find dialect maps really intriguing, and it's a big part of their identity, obviously, like how they talk, like in regional flavor. So that person does like outreach lead, social media, press, and participant recruitment. Here's the schedule. What we have in mind, this has already been postponed slightly to like September. So we do start in September of 26. So jobs will be advertised in January or February of this year. Okay, thanks so much for listening.